Hi friends, happy fall. Hey, let's paint this pumpkin scene together. We did this in a live class the other night, and while I showed all of the techniques, we only got this far. It's really easy to copy while I'm doing it, but sometimes when you go on your own, it's a little bit harder. So I'm going to take you back. We're going to go through this. We'll see how far we get. After you trace your line drawing on your piece of paper, this is kind of where you're at. Now I actually have a different size piece of paper, so I just redrew it without tracing. So some of the leaves are a little bit different, and that's okay. There's no big deal. This is being obstructed a little bit more, this leaf, by a stem here, and I added an extra leaf kind of off here in the background. So we'll do as we can with it. And today I'm gonna work with a little bit bigger brush. This is a size 10 round, and I have mostly Winsor Newton Professional or Cotman grade watercolors. I'm gonna work pretty quickly so that you can stop and go back. And this guy, in class, we painted it wet on wet, but because mine's a little bit smaller, I'm going to show you not only can you start with just your heavily saturated brush, but you can also do the wet and wet. What does that mean? That means wet the paper first and then drop the color in. You can do it either way. When something is smaller, it's a little bit easier to move the paint around the surface of the paper. And if it's bigger, then, you know, it's certainly possible, but with a small brush, it's far easier to wet your pumpkin first and then go back and put some color in. That's all I just did there. I've left this kind of center area a little bit lighter because I want that to be where some light is hitting it and reflecting it. By the way, for this tutorial, we do need a little bit of salt. Just regular old table salt will do. The different size granules, it's up to you. You can kind of experiment. I just grabbed a little bit of a green. I won't even tell you what green it is, but I'll just tell you that it is mixed with a little bit of brown, because I don't really always like green straight out of the tube. I have a few that I need to try. There's always new paints that are coming out, and my favorite brand is a Winsor Newton Professional brand. I don't tend to venture outside of that. That's just what I cut my teeth on, and I love it, and I know it. I know how it works, and so I don't use other brands. So I've just added a little bit of kind of a dirty green right there, and I think I want to come back and get a little bit more yellow. So right now this is a kind of an opaque yellow. It's called New Gamboge. I actually really love this color. Even though it's a little bit opaque, it does remind me a little bit of a gouache. Gouache is a more opaque water-based paint. Now, if you'll see, I've added the greens and maybe a little bit more color here around the pencil lines. I've tried to leave that area a little bit white. Now, because I know that watercolor dries a little darker, I am going to come back with a little bit more dirty green, maybe try to get it a little bit stronger this time. Watercolor dries lighter. Did I say that? I think I said that wrong. Watercolor dries lighter. I'm going to get it a little bit darker down here at the base. Okay, now, to get this super cool texture that I've got on this pumpkin, we added salt. Doesn't take much. You may need to figure out how light or how dark how wet or how dry you want your paint to be in order for the salt to work. With this little bit right here, I think it's gonna work pretty well, because I just tend to, I don't know, because I'm familiar with it, I've done it a few times. Gosh, I have this really ginormous bag of salt, and all I need is like a tiny bit. So get rid of that clump. Then I'm just gonna sprinkle that in the area. Now this painting is a little bit smaller than the demonstration and the example that I used for the other paintings, the earlier versions of this, but that's okay. So all that means is I probably need to wait a little bit more between my layers. Let it dry a little bit more. The bigger paintings, you tend to be able to have more space to work on, and so something dries while you're working on something else. All right, let's move over here to this one. You notice I do have wet paint over here. It's because I just squirted it all out. I just filled up my wells here with brand new paint. Now, if that intimidates you, then you might want to wait for your paint to dry. It's no big deal to me because I know that I can get the paint to the workable consistency that I like. But again, that just comes with familiarity. If you don't have an orangey red, an orangey yellow like this one, then all you have to do is mix a tiny, 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 tiny bit of red in your yellow if you want it to be a little bit more orange. Or you can just stick with whatever yellow you've got. And you know what? So much about getting good at anything is just doing it over and over again and becoming more and more familiar with it. Now, I know you know that in your head, but sometimes we do get a little bit frustrated because we are not as good or proficient at something as we want to be right away. Now, all I did is I just mixed a really, really true red. It's called a Winsor red. And then I mixed that with my, that one is a Winsor Yellow Deep. Because this brand is Winsor Newton, that's why it's called Winsor Yellow. But if you're using a different brand, you're going to have a different color. All you need to know is I'm just getting a really reddish orange. Now, with this pumpkin, as well as with the first pumpkin, anywhere where there's a pencil line is where I'm going to start getting a little bit darker. So in the center of each sort of flattened sphere on the pumpkin, the center part of that flattened sphere is receiving a lot of light. And then where it's closer down to the folds or the ridges, it's not going to be getting as much light, right? Maybe I'll have that leaf casting kind of a shadow on there. Now, if you're using your kids' watercolors, you're not going to get really strong colors, and nor is it's just going to, you're just going to feel like you're just going to keep putting it down and it's not going to get any bolder or stronger. And the colors you'll see, I just always want people to invest in really, really good quality paints. Now, I will always say, just get 3 primary colors and a Payne's gray if you're just starting. Because I would rather see people learn how to use a tool really well. If all you can afford is 3 tubes of paint, then you know what? That is always going to benefit you far more than if you buy something that's fancy and it has lots and lots of colors for you to pick from. There's our orange. Now you can't see it, but I have off camera a paper towel, and I never leave my paintbrush in the water. Always lay that down. And you know what? Actually, before I add the salt here, this is almost too fake of a color. I need to get it a little bit dirtier, like a pumpkin sitting on the ground. So I'm gonna get some more of that brown, that dirty green kind of color. So now brown is some browns is a very warm brown. It's a raw sienna. It's really close to orange, right? But I'm gonna come back in, maybe do a little bit of speckling here. Now mine's still pretty wet, so I can do this and each little droplet will bleed. You know what? I think really what I need is more yellow. Let me get some more yellow in there. It's too thick and gloopy. With watercolor, you never want it to be thick because it instantly becomes opaque. It's just not as interesting. I think that's better for there. I'm gonna add a little bit more green. Now this is a really reddish orange, and so green and red being complements, when we mix them together, they become brown. I am going to come back later with a lot more shading, but at least for now, this is as dark as I can get it while it's wet without just really, really, really saturating the colors. So I'm going to come back in later and we're going to do some of those glazes. Remember, glazes are thin, transparent layers, one on top of the other. The glazes have to dry before you put the next layer on it. And you know what? I see a spot that's still wet. I really, really want texture right there, but I just can't overdo it. Now, this is it's a dance between figuring out how wet and how dry the paint needs to be before you put the salt on it, because if it's too dry, there's nothing for the salt granule to absorb. If it's too wet, the salt just becomes dissolved in the water. So we just become familiar with it. Okay, so here we are. I'm moving on to the leaves. And you know, I think I'm going to switch to a smaller brush because this is such a small painting for me. By the way, my favorite size is 11 by 17. When I work on things that are smaller, I just work very differently. Okay. I do a lot of illustrations that are 8 by 10, but when it's a really, really deep and involved painting, I just can't paint super small anymore. So on my original, you'll notice that across the top here is lots of really, really warm greens, yellows, and true greens and forest greens. And then across the bottom, there's lots of variations of blue greens and blues. There's also a variation in how saturated the color is. You can see in some areas, this is a very, very watered down color. And then right next to it within the same shape is a stronger color. And so I've got a little bit of variation within each little triangle here, but then also from shape to shape, then there's a lot more variation. Don't be afraid to go really blue in maybe a couple areas. Try to keep it kind of warm-ish. And we will, you know, I'm gonna tuck this under. Maybe, yep, you guys can kind of see that. Okay, so here we are. I'm not gonna go for my orangey red because actually what's a lot closer to a green is a more lemon. Gosh, I said red. I'm not going to go for an orangey yellow. I'm going to go for a more lemony yellow because that's a little bit closer on the green side of things. Let me clear off some space on my palette. I very rarely ever wash out my mixing wells because I like to use what's there. But on this little travel kit, which I really, really like, I don't have a lot of space to mix, and so I'm getting my lemon yellow right here. It is mixing with my two other yellows, but oh well. I'm also going to grab one of those greens, and you know what? If it's kind of a brownish green, no problem. We'll start with that. You kind of start with whatever you got. That's really pretty. I really like that green. I know maybe it looks like a puke green. Toxic green. I had one student call one of my greens one time. So there's a little turquoise with that. I just have, I don't know, I've never really been a big fan of the green straight out of the tube. So there's that one right next to it, and you notice maybe you notice that I have left a little white space between the two shapes, and that's just for a pretty patterning effect and sort of showing off that there's the veins in there. And it's not literal, but I'm sort of, maybe it's a nod to the fact that there might be a highlight hitting that vein. And then it does become sort of an abstracted kind of design for these leaves, and that's really pretty. I'm going back over to my olive green. So this is kind of a fun trial and error, figuring out what color green you like. Maybe off on the side, by the way, you can test it out. I know a lot of people are a lot more methodical, and they will write down what a certain color combination is, a little bit like a math problem. 7 plus 3 is 10. Olive green plus new gamboge equals this one, or, you know, ultramarine plus lemon yellow is this one. So if you wanted to, you could do that. And I am a little bit envious of people who are that disciplined. That's just not me. And actually what you see here, where I have 3 different, very, very different yellows in one well, would probably drive a lot of professional watercolorists crazy. But for me, it works. And I don't do it on my main palette, but here I have no problem. Okay, now I'm getting my yellow dirty. Don't get your yellow dirty. Especially when it's really little like this. It's so hard to clean out. Am I showing you all the wrong ways to do things? I hope not. Now, on this guy, I do actually need to pay attention to the shadow because there's a bit of leaf in front of it, and I would rather have it be light in front, dark in back. Okay, and as I move down front here, now this leaf, unlike the original, has a vine crawling around right in front of it. The other one does not. So I'm just trying to make sense of all those lines, paying attention to the veins. Get my blues in there. Like I said, vary not only the color, but also how much water you have in each one. Maybe within each little shape, you can kind of change the color a little bit too. Let's see. So this one, I'm going to start it out blue. And then up here at the top, I'm going to add yellow. Nope, I want that blue, not yellow. There we go. That's really the pattern that's going to be on all of your leaves. If you feel like it's an area that needs to be catching some light, then lighten it up. If it's in shadow, maybe it needs to be a little bit more shaded and dark. I don't think I loved that color at first, but it's too light compared to the rest. So I just need it to connect. That's okay. All right. This one's not quite dry yet, so I'm going to show you how to do, let's see. I think maybe we'll do another leaf or two. Let's try, not all of these leaves are the same, but maybe you guys can just kind of follow along with me. Variations on blues and greens. And I think what I need to do is let a lot of this dry, and then we can come back to it in a minute. Again, the smaller you're painting, the more you have to, well, I mean, depending on how much water you use in the painting itself, of course, but if I'm moving around a lot on a small painting, I really am gonna have to wait for things to dry. Now, if you're extremely impatient, grab a hairdryer. If you live where I live, you stick it outside for 30 seconds in the summer, no joke, no exaggeration, and it's dry. I've used a heat gun before, but then you have to be careful because if the paper's hot when you come back to paint on it, sometimes it just does funny things. Okay, so I'll show you real quick one of the vines. I did pay attention to the light and dark on the vine. I paid attention to where there may be a shadow cast. And so, especially at least on this, oops, this main vine here, I want it to be fairly yellow to start out. Not quite that brown. And do you notice that I went outside the lines? No big deal. I'll stop there for a second. I'm gonna come back with a dark green. Drop down, give myself a little shadow there. Maybe this one's casting a shadow. I'm gonna just leave it there for a minute because I can come back once that's dry and add a little bit more. Let's see. Okay. I'm just gonna start blocking this in. I have a kind of a dirty green again. I'm gonna paint these little twists kind of like I did the leaves, where these are triangles in here, but I'm leaving a little channel for white as if the sunlight was hitting it over there. I'll do the same thing over here. Now, my orange isn't all the way dry, so I am just gonna try really hard to not let it bleed into the rest. Get a little bit more green. And if it does bleed a little bit, it's really not that big a deal. And in fact, wherever is more wet bleeds into wherever's more dry, because the wet area, and in my case it's the orange, the wet area is bleeding into the green or the stem because the water moves, right? This is less green than on our original, and I don't mind. It's fine if it's different. So with this vine, this may not apply to your painting, but with this vine, it's right in front of that leaf behind it. So because they're both green, I want to get that vine behind it a little bit darker so that the vine stands out as if it's in front. That's better. That might mean I have to go back up and darken some of these. So that I have a really nice balance. Because I did want the top portion to be darker than the bottom. So it kind of looked like it was falling forward, opening. But I'm losing some of my pretty variation that I had on the first go round, so I don't want to cover all of that up. So I'm going to try to leave it. Ooh, you know what I think I'll do? I'm just going to get it darker here at the bottom. On a couple. Just like there's a shadow being cast is all. Because if everything is the same value, that's actually a mistake lots of beginner watercolors make. If everything's the same value, the whole thing looks flat. Okay, then we just travel around and we do all of our leaves. Variations. This is really small. So it's going to be, I just don't have as much room for details. That's okay. It's almost like this is a sketch. So the bottom half of this leaf, I just want it to be more watered down, a little cooler. Kind of cool when it bleeds, I guess. I'll use some of that same color over here. See, it's actually, I mean, I've rinsed out my brush pretty much. This is just kind of like a not very clean brush. It just has a little bit of pigment left in it. I'm getting a little bit of color on it now. So there's kind of the bottom half. You see there's a little bit of variation. Now I'll go back and I'll get some stronger color for the top half. That's a good green. I like that green. Maybe I'll use a little bit of that green here in the stem. Kind of while it's wet. I'm trying to get it on the left side of each of the little triangles because that should be the most in shadow. Cool. Okay. I know I said this yellow business didn't bother me, but today I might have made a mistake here. Getting all those yellows cooped up in the same little space like they were quarantining or something. Oh, sometimes good stuff happens from quarantine. Sometimes you just make more of a mess. Okay, let's see. Just moving right along. Getting our colors. Turquoise. I really, really like turquoise. It's not from Winsor Newton's professional line. It's from their student line, which is called Cotman, Winsor Newton Cotman line. But it's just such a good warm blue. And I have used it so much in so many of my paintings. And it's literally called turquoise. Okay, where are we at? We're doing our bottom side here. A little lighter. Maybe a little more blue. Now this you'll notice I left because I wanted to get it really, really light in there. So I'm starting with yellow. I'll put a little bit of light greenish turquoise down here. Cool. Let's finish off that vine. I think everything is light enough. Dry enough, I should say. Looks good. Okay, I actually can't do any more until it dries, and so we are going to make a part 2